to Broadband Breakfast live online for Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022. My name is Drew Clark. I'm editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. Very excited to have a wonderful and vibrant discussion on the topic of the day today. Will new Federal Communications Commission's rules change competition in multi-tenant environments? So we're going to kind of unpack what all that means momentarily. But as usual, I just want to say a few words up top about Broadband Breakfast, about our programming and products and forthcoming events. We believe in better broadband, better lives. That's our mantra here at Broadband Breakfast. We are a news organization. We also do events. You may know us from this event we do every Wednesday at 12 noon, Broadband Breakfast Live Online. We have recently kicked off Broadband Breakfast for Lunch, okay? The second Wednesday of each month. We meet in person at Clyde's of Gallery Place in Washington, D.C., and we live stream, so it's a hybrid event. We encourage you to go to Broadband Breakfast to learn about, sign up for those events. We're also gearing up for Broadband Communities Summit in May. We do a conference with that event every year. It's called Digital Infrastructure Investment. So we're looking forward to that in 2 months. And we, of course, do daily news and opinions and expert opinions on Broadband Breakfast. We publish many news stories every day. We do not come at the issue of broadband access and infrastructure from any one technology or one political perspective, other than believing in higher capacity broadband and its capacity to change people's lives. But we do, of course, encourage you to join, sign up, and be a part of our events. I don't normally do this, but we've been doing this event for 2 years. We're coming up on 2 years. We started because of the pandemic, obviously responding to the inability to gather in person. Now we can. We're excited about that. I stay connected to people around the world through broadband still. I have just been, so many people shocked by the news in Ukraine and Kiev. My cousin has been a scholar on religious freedom and has written many papers with Ukrainian authors, co-authors, and she told my family that she's got her co-author friend is just in the suburbs of Kiev, and it's kind of like so hard to think about an army surrounding your city or about to. So our hearts and prayers go out to Ukraine and all the people who are fighting bravely for their freedom. And I just wanted to mention that. Obviously, that's been what everyone's been focused on, including our president Joe Biden and his State of the Union address last night. He focused on how and the unity in the chamber was extraordinary behind that. And so we never get that kind of unity on all issues, but we can on some, and I'm proud to be supportive of everything we can do on that front. I did mention that we do Broadband Breakfast live online every week and Broadband Breakfast for Lunch next week. Just quickly sharing this page for you. You can go to broadbandbreakfast.com, go to the top, and you'll see our page that says Broadband Live. Go ahead and click on that. You can see all of our upcoming events. We also have an archive page at the bottom where you can see all of our past events for the past 2 years. But here you can see what we're doing the next few weeks. We're going to be preparing for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act's Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program next week. Broadband Breakfast for Lunch. We'll be talking about should wireless internet service providers overbuild themselves. 2 weeks from today, we're going to talk about big tech and the American Innovation and Choice Online Act. 3 weeks from today, 4 weeks from today, as we gear up for Earth Day in the coming month, we'll be talking about how technology helps the environment. And then we continue with our broadband maps and data session, part 2. We had part 1 on Groundhog Day, part 2 on April 6th. So these are some of our events. We hope you'll stay attuned to those. We also want to give a shout out to all of our sponsors without whom we wouldn't be able to do our programs. They include Utopia Fiber, Lit Communities, Broadband.money, Broadband Now, Powerhouse Management, Lightbox, Samsung, Render Networks, and Positron Access. So we want to thank those sponsors for your support. Now let's turn to the topic at hand. Will the FCC's new rules, will they change? First of all, will they change competition in multi-tenant environments? And will that be a good thing? So we've got five great panelists. I'm just here for the ride to tell us more about this topic. And I'm going to say just a quick word about each of them up front, and then they can say a little bit more about themselves as we go through that order. So first up will be Corey Johnson. Corey is the managing partner of JBRI Holdings, which is an entity working for a sustainable future by building smart cities with an integrated approach to real estate, clean energy, and digital. So he will lead us off, kick us off on this topic. He'll be followed by our next panelist, Jenna Leventoff. Jenna is a senior policy counsel at Public Knowledge. She knows this issue extremely well. She was on a previous panel we had in the fall on this topic, and it was another kind of rousing exchange. So we're going to hear from Jenna now that the rules have been finalized and what will come of them. And again, she focused on broadband deployment and adoption at the nonprofit group Public Knowledge. Jenna will be followed by Brian Rader. Brian, I've known for many years. We see each other every year at the Broadband Community Summit. Brian has more than 2 decades of experience in the multifamily broadband industry and is now the president of Pavlov Media. So really excited to hear Brian's perspective on these changes in the industry. Fourth up will be Reg Reiser. Reg is the founder and CEO of Positron Access Solutions, and Reg has a really commanding knowledge of this industry and this topic matter, and not just from the policy, but kind of how this is going to impact businesses, ISPs, property owners, and the like. And then our final guest for today will be Joe Plotkin. Joe is the Director of Business Development for Stealth Communications. I'm intrigued not only by the name, by what Stealth is doing. It's a fiber ISP serving businesses in New York City. And again, I'm super keen to learn more about Stealth and their take on this particular issue in this space. So with that, let's open it up, give it over to you. Like I said earlier, 5 minutes at most for your opening remarks into our discussion after that. So go ahead, Corey.
All right. Thanks, Drew. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to the conversation. I'm responsible for asset allocation at JBRI Holdings. We have a great team, and we invest in communities for a more sustainable future by building smart cities with an integrated approach to real estate, clean energy, and connectivity. I'm a financial professional by training, but it just so happens over the past decade, I've spent much of my time working with network engineering teams around the world, covering the United States, China, Eastern Europe, Africa, and Latin America. I've had the pleasure of working with great people in all these places. On the whole, the United States has the most comprehensive and the most advanced networks in the world. We've done something right here, and at the same time, we need more. We're competing with the talents of over 7 billion people around the world. Broadband in America is the discussion about maximizing the positive network effects of humanity, technology, and capital when they work together. Connectivity is essential to modern life. Network capacity is growing fast, and gigabit speeds are delivered through the air. And real estate today has moved from a private equity asset class to a bond proxy. All of these things are important to understand when studying the broadband soup. In the case of the FCC ruling, To me, it's a clarification about how property rights interact with the major tenets of the wider broadband debate. The FCC ruling has a narrow scope in this context. Whether it's too much or not enough, it turns out more connectivity is a commonality shared around the world, and I have yet to encounter a government, population, or industry that does not support further expansion. I'm also not so young that I lack the perspective of history, and I'm not so old that I don't look forward far into the future. It's important to ask yourself, do I think this because it is the way things have always been? Or do I think this because I believe the future will bring change and innovation? I find that the speed of regulation leaves it to address problems of the past, while the pace of innovation continually expands beyond regulatory clarity. In 1999, broadband was first introduced as a factor in public policy, and 20 years later, it is still relevant. The definition has changed over time, and today's speeds are over 400 times faster. In 2007, with 3G start of the wireless internet, the definition was updated to clarify broadband internet access should always be on. A home broadband connection in a multi-tenant environment does not always provide a connection that is on in today's mobile world. Home broadband does not connect families when they aren't home. A connected life extends beyond Wi-Fi. And when we look at innovation, it can seem far removed and is often just around the corner. 2G with talk and text replaced the home phone. 3G with the mobile internet replaced desktop browsing. 4G with mobile video replaced cable television with streaming. And 5G with mobile for everything is restructuring the global economy. It is with this lens that I understand broadband. It's my understanding in this context, the FCC rule revision addresses two things. The first is property rights, particularly those relating to certain wires and commercial frameworks. This will impact billions of dollars of investment. But in the context of the $1 trillion of investment needed to expand 5G connectivity nationwide, it is a refinement to policy to address aging infrastructure. The piece I'm keeping a watchful eye on in the revision is the second part, which is the impact that it will have on the wireless connectivity of the future.
Wonderful, I said. Thank you so much for that introduction and laying out. Let's turn now to Jenna Leventoft to give your perspective on the FCC's final decision that it recently took.
Thanks, Drew. So just to back up a second, I think that this does three things. The FCC's order, as mentioned by Corey, is not particularly comprehensive, but it tries to hit at some of the worst offenders that we have. So first, it says that if you have an exclusive marketing agreement, and this is where, I don't know, and Drew, you can stop me if I'm explaining too much for this crowd, but basically—
over-explain is better, so go ahead.
So if you have an agreement for exclusive marketing, so this basically says only one company can market in the building, that the provider needs to be transparent that that's what they have. And they need to explicitly say in their materials, you're actually allowed to go and buy service from another provider. We're the only providers that can market in this building, but that doesn't mean that we're the only providers that can offer service. And the second thing it does is it bans something called a sale leaseback agreement. So there's different rules of the FCC that basically say, I don't know how to describe this actually, but basically what it does is providers sometimes will sell their wires back to the landlord. And so in that way, because the landlord isn't regulated by the ISP, they're not technically violating the rules. And so the FCC said, yeah, no, you're still violating the rules. I'm going to need you to stop doing that. And then the third thing that the FCC did here is they said, there's a thing called graduated revenue sharing agreements. So what a provider will do is they'll say, hey, landlord, the greater percentage of people in your building that sign up for our service, the greater percentage of a kickback you get. And what that encourages the provider to do is to say, well, I don't want to let any other providers into the building because then I won't get that huge percentage of kickback. Obviously, I won't hit that really high percent. So I think what the FCC did here is they curbed a lot of the worst offenses in terms of preventing competition in multi-dwelling units. But I don't think that I don't think that we're done here. President Biden said something interesting yesterday during his State of the Union. He said, capitalism without competition is exploitation. And I think that we curb some of the worst exploitation, but we still have a lot left here. So one of the things that I remain concerned about is something called bulk billing. I have a lot of friends who live in apartment buildings, who live in condos, and they have this thing where the landlord will purchase broadband service for the entire building, and they'll just include the cost of that service in rent. And you don't get a choice of which provider you have. It's included with the rent, and that's what you get. And if you're not happy with that provider, oftentimes you don't have any other options because the landlord won't let a different provider into the building because they'll say, everyone has service, we don't need you. Even if they do, you're still paying for the bulk billing provider, but then you have to pay extra for a second provider. And I think that really starkly limits consumer choice because most consumers don't have the ability to pay for broadband twice. We have some of the most expensive broadband in the world. So, that's like a big thing. But even more than that, I think banning each type of agreement that we have as we see it isn't going to stop this problem. Anytime the FCC comes in and bans a particular arrangement, FCC or landlords and ISPs are going to come in and they're going to find a loophole. They're going to find a way around it. And so until the FCC bans all types of exclusive agreements, I don't think we're going to have the competition that we need to see for consumers. And we're going to continue to have the higher prices, and we're going to continue to have the worst customer service, and we're going to continue to have customers who aren't able to get the exact service that they want because it's not available to them. I always really enjoy saying this was actually the first issue I worked on when I came to public knowledge. And I had a provider in my old apartment building. I could only get one. It wasn't the one I wanted. And when I realized why that was, when I came to public knowledge, the first thing they had me work on was this. I was like, that's why I couldn't get a provider. And so this has been an issue that I've been passionate about ever since, because it's directly impacted me. It directly impacts about 30% of the country who lives in a multi-dwelling unit, let alone all of you probably at some point before the pandemic have worked in a multi-dwelling unit. So it's likely impacting your providers as well. That's actually, I think, the last quick point that I will make is this doesn't just impact consumers, although it certainly does. And this issue also impacts a lot of businesses because a lot of businesses want competition as well, particularly nowadays when we have a lot of network outages. It's a lot easier for a provider to maintain their business if they can switch. If they have a lot of providers essentially want to purchase broadband from two people so that if one goes out, they can have broadband from someone else. And so this is certainly a consumer issue, but it's also a business issue. And so I want to call attention to that. And, like I said, I think the FCC took great steps here. I think they did as much as they could do without having a full FCC. Right now, we're still waiting for Gigi San to be confirmed by the Senate. But once, we have a full FCC, I certainly hope that the commission will take steps to ban all agreements that function as exclusives to help both consumers and businesses who are in multi-dwelling units.
Well, wonderful. And thank you very much, Jenna, for laying out those priorities that you have there. Let's turn now to Brian Reiser. The time is yours.
Okay. Thanks, Drew. It's an honor to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. The last comment about bulk has changed how I want to spend my 5 minutes, but I will say that, the multifamily industry over the last 20 years in tech has really changed. It has become very competitive. All three of the data points in the FCC report and order declaratory ruling that came out on February 15th are things that don't really impact us as a service provider, but do impact a lot of the service providers in our industry. The three items, and we just went through them. I don't want to go deep dive into them except to give some practical response with what the MDU owners and service providers are doing to respond to those. The first being revenue share. There are already conversations around how to work around the revenue share issue that the FCC has adopted, the exclusive revenue share. Now, what you'll see are service providers going to non-exclusive revenue share, which doesn't impact the service provider all that much. And the second element is the graduated revenue share. We're already hearing rumblings 3 weeks after this report and order came out that some of the providers are going back to last year's revenue share. And rather than using a graduated scale, they will come up with a blended average over the last 12, 18, or 24 months and say your revenue share percentage is now 6.5 and it's fixed rather than being graduated. So that's the first workaround. The second item, that the disclosure. There really wasn't a lot of teeth in the disclosure requirements. It does say that it needs to be visible and it has to disclose to the resident. I don't know if a resident cares a whole lot about exclusive marketing or if that's a term they're even aware of. I suspect that what will happen is that much of this language will be buried in an acceptable use policy, buried in a subscribership rules or agreement language, but won't be loud and clear in the leasing office for a resident when they move in. And in fact, a lot of move-ins today are happening virtually where the leasing agent is no longer in the office, and that may change post-COVID, but for the last 2 years, much of this has been done remotely. So how the service provider communicates that to a resident is very ambiguous today, and I think easy to work around. The last item is the sale and leaseback. We don't see that a lot, but the sale and leaseback concept was a workaround from a previous ruling that the FCC created on inside wiring rules. And it was a way for a service provider to install wiring and then sell it to the owner for maybe $1 and lease it back exclusively. And that was certainly not the intent of the FCC. So I think they accomplished a lot in including that from a level of competition. Finally, I will mention that bulk agreements, and this is what I wanted to mention at the beginning. I think bulk agreements are incredibly pro-consumer, and here's why. We are starting to see bulk agreements included in affordable housing. We've never seen this in affordable housing. If you go into neighborhoods, low-income neighborhoods, and look at the wiring from service providers in older buildings that service and support affordable housing, it is horrible. You see the ivy on the side of buildings. It's a terrible product. With bulk agreements today, service providers are installing a brand new architecture into a community and providing services to everybody in the community, whether it's a low-income community or a conventional multifamily community. And we're seeing that the service comes with no installation fee, no credit check, no waiting between 12 and 5 p.m. for the technician to show up. Everything is already on before you move into the community. There are so many features and benefits with having bulk that create lower rates for the consumer and better quality of service. So we believe strongly that bulk agreements have a role in our space and are very pro-competition. Where I think we have to be careful with bulk is that bulk agreements are also used as profit centers for the MDU owner. And if they're buying a $30 or $35 a unit service and selling it at $50 or $60 or $75 a unit to the consumer, or adding it in as a rental required fee on top of rent, then we sort of have a different workaround, and it takes some of the benefit away of having bulk. But bulk services are clearly an advantage for the consumer. My final point is I would say that the market is extremely competitive already. I don't think that this report and order will change that dramatically. But I think the level of competition in multifamily today versus 10 years ago and 20 years ago is dramatically different. I look forward to the Q&A as well. Thanks, Drew.
Of course. No, thank you for your perspective on this, coming from the perspective of a provider of multifamily broadband. Let's turn now to Reiser. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about your take on this complicated issue and how adapting can be done by those with the vision and energy to do so. So, Reg.
Well, first of all, the U.S. is 11th in the rank in the world in the high-speed internet. The FCC ruling will help fix that. Concerning the aspect of bulk arrangements or bulk agreements, those are fine because they're still non-exclusive. The idea is nothing could be exclusive. We do a lot of work with subsidized housing because of the costs that we offer, and they're subsidized, and those type of agreements are fine. Anyone can go to a large MDU operator and say, if you're in this MDU, we'll give you this price, but everyone still has the option to opt in or opt out if they want, and so it's still not exclusive. The key thing that this thing is doing is it's completely opening up open access to the marketplace to all the wiring. The cable cos will lose exclusivity on coax. Telcos or anyone who put in fiber will lose exclusivity on that, and anyone could use any of the wiring in buildings. So essentially, what the thing is, when they bring fiber to a building, you're going to want to see that you get an adequate take rate to make it profitable. Otherwise, you don't do it. Now, with what's going to happen is that those with the older technologies, they're no longer going to be guaranteed the older methodologies using the technology like fiber. They're no longer guaranteed a certain percentage take rates in the building. There'll be less. So the carriers that are going to win are going to be the nimble carriers that adapt to new technologies that can be very profitable even at low initial take rates. Those are going to be the winners. The other ones will lose market share very rapidly. Effectively, new technologies could bring you from a fiber or fixed wireless input to a building, like a G.hn will be able to give you gigabit speeds to each tenant at 20% to 25% of the cost, fastest time to revenue, installing in hours, scalable, so you only have to put it in where you need it because the wiring already exists, and the profitability, low take rates. This opens up the market to new ISPs, to people who want to get in and move very quickly, get instantaneous bandwidth with less CapEx. And it's going to make a huge difference to the market. We're entering into a period like of the Wild West sort of thing. Everything is free for all. And that's the stuff that progress is built on. The story is going to be adapt and embrace new technologies or die. And that's going to be very crucial going forward. It will also spur more fiber penetration to buildings, because now that you can deliver it more cost effectively within the buildings, you'll want to be able to link up the buildings, because you were before thinking, how long is it going to take? How much money is it going to take? Because you have to fiber a whole building all at once, which is very expensive and costing up to $800 per door and $1,600 if you get a 15% rate effective cost. So this is going to spur a lot of development. It'll spur lower costs for consumers, and it'll make a major difference with carriers.
Well, thank you for that remarks and framing it in such a positive way. Again, as I try to follow this issue and learning more and more, but there's so many nuances and so many different directions. So let's get Joe's take on this, and then I've got a couple questions that I want to kind of help frame the rest of our discussion. But let's turn it over to you, Joe, and stealth communication.
Sure, Drew. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Stealth is a fiber provider in New York City, so I'm servicing businesses. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, from a sort of pulled back view, that about the competition that we see on the commercial side, which is sort of where we would like to see the residential side. I would start with pointing out that it's because of the, Drew noted in our chat beforehand that we've known each other for a long time in various roles going back. And I noted that there used to be a competitive ISP industry that was much more robust in the late 90s. And competition is what has been contracted and is what we're trying to resurrect here, as noted in the State of the Union last night. And a couple of key principles should be stated, just because they're always assumed that everybody understands them, but they need to be made explicit. One is monopoly is a great business model. Right? It's a better business model than competing. It's a lot easier. And I say that as somebody who's in business, who's a capitalist. It is a better business model. You have to acknowledge that when trying to regulate businesses that would rather have less competition. Competition is better for the consumer and and arguably for the society as a whole. It's dynamic. It gives everybody a chance to have choice. And so on the consumer side, we don't really have that. We've seen through these exclusive deals and various other encumbrances the difficulties of having competition on the residential side. But in New York, on the commercial side, where Stealth has built a fiber optic network around New York, we have robust competition. And I thought it could serve as somewhat of a model of where you're hoping to get to, right? The pandemic has awakened the consumers. Everybody, when they're working from home, has realized the inadequacies of the broadband infrastructure we have. And couldn't we do better? Well, you can't easily take your business across the street like you can, you go into a supermarket, how many brands of bottled water are there? It's bottled water. And this is our communication system that we're going to build our entire economy on. And you have the choice of one, maybe two. That's not a robust market. So on the commercial side, in a lot of, large, shiny office towers in Midtown Manhattan, there is robust, and I mean robust, competition amongst various players, not just Stealth, but Cogent, Pilot, Crown Castle, Verizon, Spectrum Fiber, and on and on. I'm sure I'm leaving, there's easily 10 in some buildings. And so we compete on price, we compete on performance, we compete on deals we can make, where we're connected, how we're connected. And as somebody pointed out before, in this day and age, if you're running a business, you need real symmetric bandwidth. You may need point to point. You may need other attributes, and you can't rely on any one connection. So you may need a secondary provider that has alternate routes to out to the internet or back to a data center. So we need a more robust environment, and I think that that's a model to some of what is going to be seen on the residential side, that some of these rule changes will help. There will still be impediments. It will not by itself, these rule changes, I don't think, on the residential side, be sufficient to just instantly create competition. But you're starting to see a thawing in that marketplace. With more and more providers, Stealth, we provide wholesale service to some providers. Some of them are called MSPs, some are the actual ISP, but they're going into these buildings, and some are doing it by bringing our fiber in. Others, like Starry, are doing it from wireless, coming from the rooftops and cabling down. There's starting to be more and more as the demand has driven it for choice. And so to the extent, I'll give you back the time, but to the extent that the competitive environment on the commercial side can serve as a model, I think it can be instructive.
Okay, well, wonderful. And thank you for that perspective. So let's dive into the discussion. And my first question is this inevitably a zero-sum game between the consumers on one side, who want competition, who will benefit from more competition, and the ISPs and property owners on the other side. And I recognize they sometimes have different interests, but let's just start with that question for each of you. Like, is this a zero-sum game? What the consumer benefits, the ISP / property owner is going to lose? Or is there something that I'm missing? Because that's what I heard a lot of, is it's just a fight and government FCC needs to kind of mediate between those two parties. So let's go in the same order we started with. Corey, Jenna, Brian, Reg, and Joe.
Yeah, I guess it depends what your use case is. If you're going head to head for residential or single use connection for home Wi-Fi, it seems to be a heads up match. If you look more comprehensively about the connectivity requirements of real estate owners, it is not a zero-sum game. If you incorporate IoT and device monitoring into your service, you can help real estate owners access lower cost financing through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac for large properties. And that is particularly relevant when you look at the pricing of real estate assets today. And that cost savings on debt is a material advantage to the operators out there.
Okay, a lot there we can unpack more too, but let's keep going. Jenna, what are your thoughts on this?
I don't think it has to be a zero-sum game. I think it is right now because we don't have competition. But if we did, and you're a provider and you are providing the best service for the best price, then you will win. That's, the nature of a competitive market, is that the business that's best suited to customer needs is going to pull ahead. And so I don't think it has to be a zero-sum game. I think providers need to step up their game and offer better service, and then they don't have to lose out just because they don't have a monopoly.
Brian.
Yeah, I would say it's not. I think that the service providers have come a long way in the last decade. I think there's performance requirements today. There are penalties if providers don't perform. There are termination clauses. It's a very different business. And I think in many cases, the good providers are providing much better service today than they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think that there is a path for both the provider and the owner and the resident to have a seat at the table and be able to all win in this discussion.
Well, Brian, you keep saying they've come a long way, but where were they at? Why was broadband so horrible in MDU spaces historically?
So for a long time, it was a coax only product. The incumbent provider in 15 states had mandatory access rights. So in 15 states, mostly in the East Coast and in the upper Midwest, the incumbent cable provider provided internet service, made it rather difficult. You couldn't use inside wiring rule back years ago. Now you can, of course, but the providers were all using coax. And I think that's changed. The infrastructure has changed, but also the rules of the road have changed. There are hundreds of independent providers competing for the, I don't want to call it a monopoly, but competing for the right for a bulk agreement that comes with enormously high performance clauses. It's not just about speed. It's not just about price. It's also about feature set. Someone mentioned IoT, back of the store functionality. And I think these are benefits that are helping everybody. And we as an industry have come a long way in the last decade. We're not at a spot now where I would say the resident benefits in every situation, but in many markets, it's dramatically, someone mentioned 8 providers in a building. We have a dozen providers in some of our markets that we compete with for the right to enter a multifamily community. And that wasn't the case 10, 15, 20 years ago. It is today.
Many more questions occur, but let's keep going, get Reg and Joe in this.
Okay, one thing was mentioned was competition. Competition is limited. If you talk about a fiber company versus a fiber company or versus a cable company, and they're all competing, but that doesn't necessarily bring the greatest value. You're witnessing now a major shift in technology that's going to make a difference. For example, the use of G.hn within a building, which is the largest cost, rewiring the building or getting the bandwidth to all the people, gives you an 8 times better IRR than wiring fiber directly to each door. So this change, first of all, the FCC has opened this up with all the wiring. This change is going to benefit both consumers and providers that will see their costs plunged. Those that don't go with the new technology that can give you the same ARPU as fiber just by using the existing wiring are going to lose. And it's going to effectively reduce the cost to consumers and make carriers also more profitable. And concerning smart buildings, it's the same thing. You bring bandwidth to the building. We provide many smart buildings because all you have to do is provide the bandwidth available through Wi-Fi and you operating your smart buildings. So essentially, it's a win-win all the way around. It's like a shift from Blockbuster to Netflix.
Right. Let me jump in, Reg, and again, we'll try to give everyone time here. And Joe, we haven't forgotten you, but I want to ask this question, which is kind of my next one that I think you can piggyback off, Reg. So, is the battle just to get fiber into the building and then allow competition from it, or is that not the right way to look at it? In other words, if we said like the reason we've got bad internet in MDUs is because there's these legacy coax systems. And if we just got fiber to every building and then shared it or allowed people to get it, would that solve the problem or not, Reg? And I know you've got some, unique approaches to this. So what do you think about that?
If you have fiber or fixed wireless to the building and anyone could bring it to the building, the difficulty and the competitive and cost is all distributing it inside the building. And if you find a less costly way to distribute it and to be profitable, even at a very low penetration rate, and be profitable from day one, that will instantly dramatically improve the bandwidth availability. And that's where the battle is going to be won.
So for Joe, let's let you answer this question. This now 2 questions about win-win or lose-lose, and about getting fiber to the building. Like what percentage of the MDU problem does getting fiber to like the access point solve?
I wouldn't know the exact answer to that, so I won't guess at it. But what was alluded to before is it is a win for the real estate owner to have more fibers coming in, more a diverse supply of fiber providers into the building than being beholden to one provider, both for the satisfaction of their tenants, but also for all the other attributes from security cameras to Wi-Fi in the laundry room to, we work with, as I said, we work with a number of MSPs who are pioneering these sorts of services on the residential side, and they offer a menu of services to the building owners. So it's they get improved service, they get additional services that they can offer their tenants. And just to pivot quickly to on the commercial side, the commercial side came from an era of large building management and landlords demanding payment. And that has largely gone away. And in its place, we now have something like you see the emergence of something like Wired Score. For those who don't know, Wired Score is sort of the lead certification for commercial real estate buildings to say, we have certified that we have X number of, have a certain level, gold, silver, platinum of connectivity, of X number of providers, how many points of entry, how many risers, so you have a real marketplace, and so these buildings are now fighting for the opportunity or paying for the privilege of bragging about their connectivity. So that's 180 degrees from the old landlords back in the day who would say, you want a concession in my building to sell your telecommunication services, pay. Yeah. Channeling Goodfellas for a second. F you, pay me. Those have gone away because it is much more attractive. It is easier to attract and retain commercial tenants when you have a robust ecosystem marketplace of providers in that building. And I think that's a model for where you want to get to on the residential side. So there's enough choice.
Well, that's an excellent point, bringing competition squarely back into the discussion. And I'm still feeling dissatisfied with the answers to this question about, like, what is the temptation for the bulk agreement, Brian? Like, why is that such a good thing to be able to have a bulk agreement versus not? Because obviously what you're doing when you allow residents to not take one customer is they're breaking the bulk apart. So let's just get at that issue. What are the pros and cons of being able to do bulk agreements?
Well, let me also say that broadband service providers score 18 out of 19 in the University of Michigan customer satisfaction data. Historically, it's all been bad, and it's not a multifamily issue. It is a residential broadband issue that all providers. So, I don't want to think about this as just an MDU situation.
Right.
As it relates to bulk, one of the great things about bulk is that you can use different technologies. Managed Wi-Fi is the most popular architecture today that uses fiber and managed Wi-Fi inside new community. In fact, most new communities today, most apartment communities today are being built with fiber to the IDF, often to the unit, and using managed Wi-Fi to connect every common area, every apartment unit, every lobby, every green space, every amenity space, the pet walking area are all on a managed Wi-Fi network for the benefit of the consumer. You can't do that in a retail environment where 5 or 6 providers are fighting it out for 200 units of residents. Residents churn every single.
We've joined the issue finally. Okay, Jenna, what's your reaction to that? Because now we finally got the reason is, we need to be able to do these bulk deals so we can do managed Wi-Fi, we can do all these other benefits. What do you say to that? What do others on the panel say to that?
I'm not entirely sure that I buy it, because I think ultimately, if you're trying to make a profit, you have in many multi-dwelling units, you have a big customer base. Sorry, I'm hearing a lot of feedback on myself. You have a pretty big customer base. And I think that, especially now with programs like the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is a $30 subsidy, even if these communities are low-income communities, they're still able to pay for your internet service. And so even without bulk billing, I think that the use case is still there for providers to enter these buildings and see a profit from it. I will say, I think bulk billing doesn't have to be inherently bad, but what there isn't a lot of now is there's not a lot of ability. It's not clear to residents that they have other choices, right? If they have other choices, they may or may not. But if they do, they don't know that they can pull out and not have to pay for it. And in most cases, they do have to pay for it, right? So like, if we were to craft the rules in such a way where, yes, there's bulk billing, but a resident is able to opt out of that and not pay for it and have another option in the building, then it's not such a bad thing, then you can go with whatever. But I don't think we have those rules right now. Right now, it's consumers are stuck with what they have, and what they have may or may not suit their needs. So
thank you, Jenna. I want to get Corey, Reg, and Joe into this too, but the follow on for Jenna and Brian is like, is there, can you still have a bulk agreement and allow choice, or is it kind of a binary world? But let's hear from Corey and Joe and Reg on this point.
Yeah, I think bulk agreements and Wi-Fi will continue to exist for a long time, and they'll be profitable for a long time, and they serve certain needs of the consumer. Assuming that bulk Wi-Fi is the predominant option, I think is a fallacy when you look at the technology roadmap around connectivity and the commercialization and changes that have happened in both spectrum allocation and capacity throughput in wireless and mobility. And in the future, connected communities won't be connected through Wi-Fi. They'll be connected through LTE and mobility networks that provide broadband and gigabit speeds over the air seamlessly. And the devices utilizing eSIMs will dynamically step up to larger macro area mobility networks and allow the consumers to opt in to a lower cost data connection when they're at home. And this is the future of multi-tenant connectivity. It is at the beginning of commercialization, and anything at the beginning has the challenge of you can't look backwards to establish commercial precedent for it, but it is very much there.
For those watching on our platforms besides Zoom, and we do, stream on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, there's a lot of comments coming in, kind of, let's call them Brian Rader supporters, right? They're saying Brian's right, retail basis, big companies, without managed Wi-Fi. Daniel Meyer says you have lots of Wi-Fi interference and you cannot put an asset protection network across the property. Martha Huzenga, I hope I got your name pronounced right, Martha, says that to Jenna's point, the fact that they don't know could be more of a landlord issue and not that of an ISP. We do bulk agreements, but our contracts and talks with the landlord is always about non-exclusive. And real-time, Martha notes, just because the rules change with the FCC doesn't mean that building owners are going to let residents access another provider. So lots more feedback on that point. Jenna, do you want to kind of weigh in on this? And then again, I want to get Joe and Reg to speak to this issue of competition, managed Wi-Fi, and where the kind of future of the multi-tenant environment is going to lie.
I don't have a ton to say on managed Wi-Fi because I don't think that's my area of expertise, so I'll bow out of it.
Well, let's ask Joe, what are the pros and cons of this argument that we need a bulk arrangement to get this managed Wi-Fi versus the very strong point you made about, hey, what's really driving this space is multiple levels of competitors for commercial markets, presumably in the same buildings that there's residential environments too.
And like I said, we deal with a number of residential buildings where we are essentially the bulk internet provider, and the MSP then has a deal with the building to whether they are exclusive or not. Most of them are non-exclusive because traditionally the incumbents that we know and love are in those buildings already. So they're at least the third provider. So they've made a deal that in those places where I guess they provide more services to the building management. They're a competitive provider in those buildings, and they're doing managed Wi-Fi in the public spaces as one of their amenities that they're providing. So I think that can be managed. I just want to just touch on I think Brian made a really good point, which was sort of what I was alluding to before. Regulation is never perfect. It is just trying to manage a situation where it's preventing the tyranny of a monopoly or duopoly situation. So there's going to be circumstances where it's, a 6-unit townhouse may not, you can't go in as the third provider in a 6-unit townhouse and bring in another fiber and provide to 2 people in, at $50 a month and pay for that to happen. So there has to be some recognition that understand that there's no perfect system, there's no perfect regulation. We're just trying to get it better. We're just trying to remove other barriers to a competitive marketplace, which is the only truly sustainable, dynamic outcome, I think.
What about the role of I think this is a question asked by Corey Hayes a little earlier about what are we seeing in terms of managed Wi-Fi bulk contracts versus a fiber to the home or a hybrid fiber coax system? How does the kind of, let's just call it the heterodoxity of systems where there's multiple systems in different units playing into this issue of managed Wi-Fi? Do you want to weigh into that, Brian?
Well, first of all, the challenge is that all of these infrastructures are very expensive. So the idea that we can just bring multiple providers in, you've narrowed the list of competitors down by the amount of capital required to invest in putting fiber into a building HFC into a building, manage Wi-Fi, Ethernet. They're all expensive technologies, and they really do require an enormous amount of capital for the competitor to do this. But I think there are a number of options. And I would also argue that the infrastructure is one piece, the human infrastructure is the other. And success is not driven only by the physical infrastructure, it's also by the company that provides the best service and support to the resident, not just to the property, but to the resident. So it's a blend of both.
Uh-huh. Scott Lemke asked the question, we have tech to deploy multiple ISPs on fiber with shared fiber to each unit in an MDU. Joe, you kind of alluded a little bit to this and to the open access nature, I guess, where could you just say another word or two about what Stealth does and then how you allow others to offer services on top of that?
Right. So there are two parts of it. So as I like to say, infrastructure is not an app, right? As Brian alluded to, it's expensive, it's hard, you got to dig the streets, you got to pull the fiber, it's work, it's a lot of capital. So the reason that there is a competitive marketplace, or one of the enabling technologies, is that there is a conduit system in New York City, and especially in Manhattan and the Bronx, that is run on an even-handed basis by something called Empire City Subways, not the trains, but Empire City Subways is a conduit system, runs a conduit system. And that has allowed everybody to pull their fiber without digging up the street, each one of us. So that's how you get, all these things are components to get to the supply chain, to get fiber to the home or the bill or the office or wherever it happens to be. In terms of what we do in residential buildings right now, we are not open access. We don't just bring it to the landlord and say, have anybody on it. We have, our customer is the MSP, the managed service provider, looking to service the building, running the wires up or renting the wires, and more importantly, servicing the individual apartments, the tenants. So when there's and we provide the bulk gigabit, multi-gigabit, 5 gigabit pipe to the basement. They do the rest of it and service the customers. When the customer has an issue that they, so it's a tech support issue, that's who they call them. They don't call us. Yeah. So there's a clear delineation of responsibility, but we are not an open access provider. There's not enough competition yet where there's, right, where we've gotten 3 calls for the same building for where we would sell a different pipe to each provider. I look forward to that day.
We are running out of time, just 2 minutes left. I want to give everyone a chance to have a final word. We'll go in the same order we started in, and feel free to offer respond to any questions we haven't been able to ask that have been in the chat room, but give your focus on what happens next after this FCC ruling. And let's just, again, start from where we started. Corey, Jenna, Brian, Red, and John.
Yeah, I would say what we do is I acquire real estate distributed across entire cities. In cities where the incumbent providers don't have sufficient capacity to service the population. And using my real estate, I can build distributed networks that are more open to provide broadband connectivity to 2 to 4 family households across the air. And this works incredibly well. It reduces the aggregate level of capital required. It lowers prices for consumers, and it's a very effective tool in competition. And I would encourage everyone to think about how their experiences and their history have created internal biases in their judgment and outlook about the industry. And as I inventory those, I would look forward into technology and the commercialization roadmap and ask myself, do the beliefs that I hold today hold true over the next 3, 5, and 10 years? And in looking forward, would I modify any of my current framework to be a more competitive provider in the future.
All right. Great thoughts. Jenna.
I want to take a step back here and remind people that, we have broadband breakfast. All of us are in this space because broadband is a critical service. Like, it is essential for consumers nowadays to have broadband to do anything. But with 30% of the country in a multi-dwelling unit, we need to do what we can on a policy level to make sure that these people have access to broadband. And if broadband is not affordable because they don't have competition and the monopoly is charging whatever they want to charge, they're not going to be able to afford that broadband and they're not going to subscribe. And as a country, we're losing out if our consumers don't have what they need to, keep pace with modern life. So it's worth taking a bigger perspective here.
No, appreciate it, Jenna. Thank you. Brian, final thoughts from you. Go ahead and unmute. There you go.
Sorry. A lot of real estate owners are now investing in infrastructure, taking back control of this, and they're putting in fiber themselves, putting in conduit themselves, not just in new construction, but in existing apartment buildings. HUD is requiring bulk in new buildings now for affordable housing. We're seeing that happen today. So I think the market is getting more competitive, not less. And I would land with one final thought, which is the real estate owners, and specifically, as I sit on the service provider side, really do care about customer satisfaction and have taken enormous steps and progress over the last decade to drive growth and improve service for the MDU customer in multifamily communities across the country.
All right. Thank you for those remarks, Reg.
To me, the cost factor of distributing bandwidth more cost effectively has got nothing to do with distributing bandwidth is different than Wi-Fi. We can do different Wi-Fi providers, which, by the way, is best provided to each resident or business independently. But I agree with you that property owners will be the people who will bear the burden of the cost of the infrastructure because it's the most desired amenity for tenants, raises rents 8%, property values 3%. So they will really push for all of this. But you can also distribute Wi-Fi just on a pair of wires to still get gigabit Wi-Fi. So it's going to be very interesting what develops, but effectively costs will decrease.
Well, thank you, Reg. We give the final word to Joe Plotkin here.
Now there's pressure. I would just come back to what I started with, which is to keep that all this is moving in the right direction, but it was all driven by this great crisis. As somebody once said, don't let a crisis go to waste. And the crisis was finally everybody had to rely on their home broadband connection, and they realized it was inadequate. And it's a problem that was many of us have been working on this for decades. It's a long time in the making. It's going to take a long time to the progress will be slow, but it will move in the right direction. Keep the demand side going. Keep demanding for all the consumers and residents. Keep demanding better connectivity, a true upstream. Don't accept data caps. Don't all the bad things of incumbency. Fight against it. Keep fighting, and that'll drive more providers to your doorstep.
Well, and on that note, we'll have to conclude. Don't miss us next week at Clyde's of Gallery Place for Broadband Breakfast for Lunch. On behalf of Corey Johnson, Reg Reiser, Jenna Leventoff, Brian Rader, and Joe Plotkin, I'm Drew Clark with Broadband Breakfast. See you next week.